In formal logic, a contradiction is a signal of defeat, but in the evolution of real knowledge, it marks the first step in progress towards a victory.
On these technologies. I don't think Eric is in the audience, but Eric Schmidt is here somewhere, and he has said repeatedly, we don't have an innovation problem. We have an innovation adoption problem. And so it's getting the system, both Congress and DoD, to make the incentive changes to actually allow us to adopt the technology. And I'll just say one last thing. I'm sorry to go on so long. This really matters. When we talk about strategic competition, we are at risk of the United States military losing its military edge. What does that mean? It means we don't deter successfully in the future. It means we may not even win in the future. This is really big stakes for our country. And unless we crack this nut and figure out how to leverage our innovation ecosystem and integrate it into the national security community with greater speed and scale, we will pay a very heavy price. So, the stakes are enormous. And again, I think there are good people in the Pentagon who are really trying hard and making progress, but we just need some additional help from Congress to go farther, faster.
Michelle Flournoy, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense and Strategy under Clinton and Obama, spoke at the Aspen Security Summit, which Anya Manuel, Ripple board member, is the executive director for. It's a bipartisan forum on foreign policy in the U.S. Michelle was speaking about military, but in this conference, economics and technology is also addressed. There is a common theme that if we do not lead in technology, we will be left behind, and that cannot happen. It's national security. She points and quotes Eric Schmidt, who was a Google chairman and became President Obama's Council of Advisors on Science and Technologies with Eric Lander. Lander is now Joe Biden's science advisor.
Versus the risk of stifling innovation. Are you worried about innovation being stifled?
I think I'm not worried about it. It's happening.
We don't have an innovation problem. We have an innovation adoption problem.
The first piece of advice I give entrepreneurs that are starting companies in the crypto space, to the extent they are US based, the first piece of advice I give them is don't incorporate in the United States. The rules of the road in the United States are not clear as compared to if you're in Japan or the UK or Switzerland or Singapore. These are all countries where the governments have done the work to publish rules of the road that either are codified in law or certainly by published regulation that allow an entrepreneur to build a company, allow investors to come in. When we think back, back to the pets.com era, one of the reasons why so much innovation around the internet happened in the United States is because in the mid-90s, the US government published and codified through law clear regulatory frameworks that allowed investors to flow in and entrepreneurs to know how to build within a rule. You don't really have that in blockchain and crypto in the United States. And so I think you're seeing a lot of leadership outside of the United States, and I think that'll continue.
Right, but you think even just the sheer lack of clear rules right now is already stifling innovation here? So if we have rules, then will that stifle it even more?
Well, sorry, maybe I answered the question by saying that stifling innovation in the U.S.
Yes.
There's clearly immense innovation. Some of it maybe shouldn't ever have existed innovation, as you described. But I think there's clearly innovation happening globally. That's going to happen anytime you have a new technology framework. I think you have this kind of pre-Cambrian era of formative, almost, the foundation, that the building blocks are being laid, and people are trying new things. And not everything has worked. That's okay. And as the market resets, I think that's actually a really healthy time to step back and say, is what we're building solving a real problem for a customer, a business, a consumer? Or is it just about speculation? And if it's just about speculation, I don't think it's sustainable.
Right.
The future will be built on crypto rails. From a national defense perspective, this is as or more important than any innovation. The U.S. is on top of the global financial system from the reserve currency to sanctions. Being in control of this system is an advantage. Losing control of this system would be a tremendous disadvantage and puts us at risk.
I think what we've learned is that our own polarized politics are our greatest enemy. Like, if you ask me objectively, whose hand would I like to play? China's hand, our hand, Russia's hand, in terms of just natural strengths, like our innovation ecosystem, our talent, et cetera. I would take the U.S. hand every day, but we're not playing it very well because we're stumbling over our own politics and in some cases bureaucracy. So if you think of, what are the things we need to do to invest in the fundamental drivers of our own competitiveness, because that's how we do well, and we're able to set the rules of the road. One, science and technology investment, research and development. And the fact is, we're no longer living in an age where government puts the preponderance of research and development money on the table. Companies like Google and Microsoft and many others are driving the R&D and the innovation in our economy. But government can place bets that send signals and incentivizes and attracts private capital to come and focus on an area of strategic import for the nation.
It certainly seems like the executive order by Biden to address crypto and blockchain technology was a signal to the market. As Michelle states, it's big tech companies that lead in innovation, and the government reaps the rewards. Stumbling over our own politics and bureaucracies causing red tape is why we are not playing our hand wisely. I have faith that these think tanks, like Anya Manuel are a part of, are responsible for the smart decisions that come from the White House. What would the leaders of tech look like in post-US crypto regulations? They would be American behemoths like Ripple, and that will be responsible for the push of this innovation.
Conversation, I was struck by something in the chairman's remarks where he talked about collective analysis paralysis, where all the regulators were stuck, he said, in the past, kind of trying to figure out what they were doing, and that may actually be appropriate, right? We want to analyze before we react. On the other hand, there's a flip. He seemed to indicate in his remarks that we've moved beyond collective analysis paralysis. He referenced the president's executive order. There's another point, which is a regulatory free-for-all, where each of the regulators is trying to grab and expand their territory, right? Stable coins, here comes the Fed, right? CFTC is going to be now potentially regulating things that are touching retail investors at a much larger rate than ever before, right? We had a question from the audience about the SEC and is something an insider trading regime situation. Have we moved from collective analysis paralysis to a regulatory free-for-all?
No. No. I mean, I think, at least at the SEC, there's still a lot of analysis paralysis as to whether something is a security or not. I mean, a week doesn't go by and I don't talk to people that have some sort of application in front of the SEC, whether it's for their token or whether they're a trading platform that wants to trade a particular token, is something a security or not. And they're not getting answers right now from the SEC. And I think some of it is due to the fact that we have this case, the Ripple case, that's sort of winding its way through the court to find out whether or not they're going to continue to apply the Howie test as to whether something is a security or not, or whether there's going to be something else going forward. But there's a lot of folks that are just simply getting tired of waiting in the United States, and then what they're doing is they're going outside the United States and then, trading on these other platforms. And in U.S. investors, 1 in 5 households is going to want to trade these things, whether they're going to have protections from the U.S. laws or not. So I think they're still suffering.
The Ripple case, you're talking about the Ripple crypto, not a case rippling through the...
Yeah, Ripple Labs, their XRP token,
yeah,
exactly.
Former SEC Commissioner Michael Peeblewar states that the Ripple case is going to determine the direction the SEC takes in the future of crypto asset regulation. The Ripple case will determine if Howie applies to crypto or if they will have to take another direction. Throughout this whole interview, Michael Peeblewar's perspective matches as what I've said earlier about innovation leaving the U.S.
Competitiveness one. Front, again, it's related to that, thinking about we want the best and the brightest in the United States thinking about these issues so that we can come up with the ideas that's going to drive the next generation. You're absolutely right, David. It's not just Singapore. It's also is the Swiss financial regulators and a number of the other regulators in the Middle East, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, are thinking about these things. And we've always had the best capital markets in the world, and we need to be the leader in the crypto markets too.
Smart immigration policy. We have always been a magnet for talent. Look at the founders in Silicon Valley. Half of them are either recent immigrants or first-generation Americans. We want the best and brightest from around the world to come to the United States, and then we want to make sure that they stay and they make their lives and their businesses here.
Crypto technology has attracted the best and brightest from computer scientists to legal to business. This has the capability of removing all middlemen in the traditional system, and the reward is immense. Smart crypto regulation will attract the best and brightest to build businesses within the U.S.
Can I respond to that? Yeah, right. So you're bringing up, the interconnections in the financial system, and then you're more careful on talking about the banking system, and Chairman Bennett was talking about the financial system. When you think about systemic risk, what is systemic risk? It's the risk that a federal policymaker is going to bail out a bank either directly or indirectly by bailing out its creditors, period. End of discussion. That's all it's about. Anything with systemic risk ends up with bailing out the banks. Again, either directly or indirectly through their creditors. So, to the extent that there's exposure with funds that are out there or other things in the what some people call the shadow banking system, what I call markets, that's fine. We have failures of funds all the time. What we really worry about is the interconnections with the bank. And I agree with you that the banking regulators, the prudential regulators, where failure is not an option, have to really, really worry about exposures.
We don't have failures of money market mutual funds. Last time I saw any time one of those is going to break the buck, that's not allowed in this society for some reason.
I would argue that we should have allowed that, but that's a whole other debate that we could have had. Right, that's right.
I would argue that we should allow that as well, but then suddenly you get crypto, and we have these stablecoin proposals, or proposals for stablecoin.
Well, we did have a failure, and it didn't get bailed out. Of one, and I would argue that the algorithmic ones are not money market.
You're talking about a stable fund.
No, the stable coins. Yeah,
stable coins, not the money market.
Talking about Terra Luna?
Yeah, which is not a money market. That was algorithmic. That was a whole separate thing.
No, but if you look at the regulatory proposals that are being put out, they talk about not giving them the deposit insurance, which they'd have to pay for. They're giving them all the other guarantees that they don't have to pay for, like access to the discount window, like being able to have access to Fed master accounts, which comes with certain credit from the Fed. Some of them are proposing special liquidation regimes, which get oiled with federal support. So, look, I don't want any of this being supported. If anything should be able to fail, it should be crypto, which isn't sort of funding productive economic capacity. It's self-referential. This should be the very thing that's allowed to fail. But unfortunately, if you look at the proposals that are coming out, they're setting it up in a way that it potentially is being brought into this place that isn't allowed to fail.
That should not be brought into the prudential banking system.
Why are proposed stablecoin regulations giving special privileges to stablecoins? Why are they setting this up so they can't fail? We have been paying attention and watching incumbent after incumbent get involved in this space. There is a future to digital assets because of the economic benefit that it offers. Not to mention with stablecoins, the government can force stablecoin providers to purchase negative yielding debt as collateral, which will give demand to short-term bonds, putting a floor under the bond market.
The director of the FBI mentioned yesterday, in some ways, the North Koreans are a criminal syndicate in terms of pursuing revenue in the guise of a country. And certainly we've seen the DPRK conduct multiple hacks of cryptocurrency exchanges, gleaning, in the first one at the time, $600 million in crypto funds. So they've been a key focus. We've done a great number of steps to work to address it, from sanctioning for the first time exchanges and mixers, working on the Darknet forum. But the North Koreans are some of the most flexible and adaptable actors in the world. So we're working to come up with even more ways to make it riskier, harder, and more costly for them to execute their operations.
Have they successfully undercut our confidence in the reliability of cryptocurrencies at this point?
They've highlighted the need for far improved cybersecurity, implementation of anti-money laundering rules around the world in crypto, much as our Treasury Department has put a great deal of work working with countries around the world. And it really led to our stand-up of the International Counter-Ransomware Initiative last October with 36 countries, because it's a global problem and one that touches the pocketbooks of small and medium companies, particularly around the world. So it's a priority focus for us, and we're driving global action because so much of the infrastructure is not in the United States, so we need international partners to work with us.
Ann Neuberger from the NSA is telling you that it's a global priority to regulate crypto. It will be an international effort in order to keep the status quo. The West uses sanctions with every conflict, and removing that capability would dampen its strategic edge.
I mean, I think in many ways it's too early to tell. I mean, you talk about the internet. I mean, think back to the mid 1990s. I remember the first time I was exposed to HTTP protocol, right? And it was this before we had web browsers. We had this thing called Gopher out of the University of Minnesota, and it's like, all right, well, who could predict all the cool stuff that came out of the internet? 20, 25 years later? I think it's very early to tell, right? I mean, right now we're talking about things like potentially using stable coins or other types of, stable tokens in terms of making things more efficient, either in clearance and settlement process within financial institutions or across financial institutions, lowering the cost of remittances across borders, faster payment systems, which, Aaron, you've written a lot about that would benefit a lot of folks domestically as well as internationally, a number of things. I think those are like the kind of the use cases we can kind of see today. And there's a lot of people talking about what's going on and potentially collectively what people are calling Web 3, right? Again, using the internet as an analogy, there's going to be a lot of web vans and pets.com if things go to zero that are going to, looking back, boy, that was a really dumb idea. But, we're going to have, the new generation of Amazons and Googles come out of this stuff. And I think it's too early to tell at this point to close the book on this technology.
It's funny how we have seen contradictions from the SEC and former SEC regulators. They stress the importance of the tech, yet their actions are throwing wrenches in the works. Jay Clayton also wrote an opinion piece stressing the importance of crypto technology. As Michael stated earlier, the Ripple case is to determine if Howie should be applied to all of crypto. In my opinion, this is a necessary growing pain, and ultimately it will work out because it's of national interest to work out. It requires a very unusual mind to undertake the analysis of the obvious. Thanks everyone, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you enjoy content like this, I have a Patreon where we have weekly discussions about the macro environment, legitimate projects, technical assistance with DeFi, and much more. All videos are added commercial free.